My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy.
Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. Well, I'm not sure Liberation Day will be remembered for making America wealthy again. It hasn't quite worked out exactly how Donald Trump was hoping. In fact, it's been referred to as Obliteration Day because the stock markets have been absolutely wiped out. Around $5 trillion worth of value was wiped off global stock markets on the day following the announcement of all of the reciprocal tariffs. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's stopping there because on the day of making this video, the markets are also down by around 1.5% and could get significantly worse. So what's going on? Why hasn't Liberation Day actually worked out how Donald Trump wanted it to? Why hasn't it proved to be a major boost to the US economy? Well, the reason for that is because the USA is increasing the price of all of its imports. It's applying tariffs on every single country in the world, so it means that the cost of everything in the USA is going up. But worse than that, it means that the other countries who are exporting all of this product directly into the USA are now considering retaliation. And it's just been announced that China have announced a 34% reciprocal tariff against all imports coming from the USA. And that's in retaliation to the 54% tariff that's currently in place by Donald Trump. He put a tariff of 20% on all Chinese imports a couple of weeks ago and then added a further 34% for the reciprocal tariffs. So China has been the first to come out with its retaliatory tariffs, and it's very likely that every other country in the world will do the same. And this is going to have a disastrous impact not just on the cost of USA imports, but also on the value of USA exports and the price of everything around the globe, because obviously when you apply a tariff to something that you're importing, you're adding to the cost of it. So the people who are going to pick up the brunt of all of this are consumers, you and me, because the price of everything is going to go through the roof. And that's going to be really bad news for lots of different companies. They're going to report lower sales, lower profits, therefore they will pay less tax. And JP Morgan has now upgraded the chance of a global recession happening by the end of 2025 from 40% to 60%. So they're saying that on average, it's more likely than not that we will see a recession by the end of this year. The announcement of the reciprocal tariffs was made after the markets had closed on April the 2nd, and the impact on the markets on April the 3rd was absolutely devastating. This table summarises the movement in value of 7 of the largest stock markets in the world on April the 3rd. And as you can see, the S&P 500 fell by 4.8%, equating to $2.4 trillion worth of value being wiped out. The Dow Jones was down by 4%, which equated to $1.3 trillion. The Nasdaq was down by 6%, and the Nasdaq obviously has a higher percentage of technology businesses that are trading at very high multiples, and that equated to a value of $1 trillion being wiped out. The FTSE 100 in the UK fell by 1.8%, equating to £150 billion. The DAX index in Germany fell by 3%, equating to €100 billion. The CAC 40 in France fell by 3.3%, wiping off €80 billion of value. And the Nikkei 225 in Japan fell by 2.8%, wiping out 20 trillion yen worth of value. So in total, more than $5 trillion worth of value has been wiped off the stock markets in one single day. That makes it the worst performance on the stock markets since the COVID-19 pandemic. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, does it really matter? Isn't it just the money men who lose all of this money? All of those stockbrokers, people who are driving Lamborghinis, posting videos on YouTube saying how rich they are. It doesn't really impact me because I don't invest in shares. Well, unfortunately, it does impact on everybody because shares are something that are invested into through funds. And if you've got a pension, maybe you haven't actually taken your pension yet, you're just building up, I can guarantee that a lot of your pension will be invested into shares and bonds pants and things like that, and the value of all of those has gone down over the course of the last couple of days. And it's likely that they'll continue going down over the course of the next few weeks and potentially for the rest of this year, because as I mentioned, JP Morgan now thinks that it's more likely than not that the global economy will go into recession as a result of this trade war. And that's really what we're into now. Donald Trump has announced this raft of tariffs, which are designed to protect US industry. The logic is that if America isn't importing all of these goods, then they can be produced in the USA, and that'll be good for US businesses and jobs and income and all of the rest of it. But as I talked about in a recent video, the reason why the USA is importing goods is, firstly, it might not be able to produce those goods itself because it doesn't have the right industries. Secondly, if it's a labour-intensive process where you need to use lots and lots of people, you don't really want to be doing that in the USA because people are a lot more expensive in the US than they are in places like Vietnam and Mexico and China. So that's one of the reasons why the global economy has actually developed in the way that it has, because it moves industry that's labour intensive to low-cost countries, and therefore it makes it affordable for us as consumers. Adding tariffs onto all of those products when you import them into the USA is going to increase the price. And if the US isn't in a position to be able to actually produce those products, then it's going to be a major problem. And in order to give you a real-life example as to how this is going to work and what the impact might be on the US economy and the global economy, I thought it'd be worth having a look at a case study on Nike. So let's talk about the US sports brand Nike, which is actually the largest sports brand in the world. It was started back in 1964 by Bill Bauman and Phil Knight. The company was actually established as Blue Ribbon Sports. However, in 1971, they rebranded the business as Nike, named after the Greek goddess of victory. And in that year, the iconic swoosh logo was created by graphic design student Carolyn Davidson. And unfortunately, from her perspective, she agreed a one-off lump sum deal of $35 for designing that logo. Just imagine if she'd have negotiated a 1 cent per use of the logo deal, she would have been one of the richest people in America. But unfortunately, she isn't. Maybe she went on to do other great things. I don't know. If you do know, drop me a note below, but I haven't done the research on it. But the point here is that Nike is now the largest global sports brand, and last year it turned over more than $51 billion, sold more than 800 million pairs of sneakers, and some of those sneakers have sold for obscene amounts, $1.8 million for Kanye West sneakers and $1.5 million for a pair used by Michael Jordan. Now, despite the fact that a pair of Nike sneakers might cost you more than $100, Nike wants to produce them for as low a cost as possible, so it doesn't produce many of those sneakers in the USA. This table shows a breakdown of the countries where Nike is producing the majority of its equipment. And as you can see, Vietnam is the biggest source of production, producing 50% of all of Nike's equipment, with an estimated value of $18.7 billion. Now, unfortunately, from Nike's perspective, the new tariff rate that was announced by Donald Trump is 46% for all imports from Vietnam. So on an annualized basis, that's going to cost Nike $8.6 billion in additional cost. The second biggest source of equipment is Indonesia, where Nike obtains 27% of all of its goods, and that equates to $10.1 billion. And the new tariff rate for Indonesia is 32%, so will cost Nike $3.2 billion each year. And the third biggest country is China, where it's sourcing 18% of its equipment. That equates to $6.7 billion, and the new tariff rate for China is 34% on top of the 20% that was announced recently, and the 34% hit is going to add a further $2.3 billion to Nike's sourcing costs. So in total, the new tariffs that have been announced by Donald Trump will add over $14 billion to the sourcing cost for Nike. So that's obviously going to come straight off their profits. And as a result of that, the Nike share price fell by 13%, wiping out $12 billion worth of value. And when you look at these figures, you start to understand the real life implication of these tariffs, because everybody wants Nike sneakers. If you've got kids, they will demand to have Nikes. They won't want any other brand. So the fact that Nike now has $14 billion of additional cost means that Nike is going to increase the price of all of those sneakers. That's what they will do. They are not going to absorb this and just have reduced profits. They're going to put it onto the price. So that means that when you go to buy a next pair of Nike sneakers, you're just going to have to pay more. You're going to have to pay $14 billion worth more. Well, your percentage share of that, obviously. And that's going to happen to a lot of different businesses, because a lot of businesses that are American, that are producing things in the USA, maybe not exporting stuff, they're just making things in the US. A lot of those companies are actually sourcing equipment and components and various things that go into their manufacturing process from overseas. So all of those items are now going to cost more. So that's going to push up the price of everything in the USA, not just imports. Everything that's produced that has some component that comes from overseas. And this is one of the reasons why JP Morgan are now saying that there's a 60% likelihood of a global recession, not just in the USA, everywhere. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the tariffs that were announced on Liberation Day, or Obliteration Day as it's now being called, by Donald Trump have been one of the biggest moments of 2025 so far, because what we have seen is stock markets nosediving. We have seen more than $5 trillion worth of value wiped off in one day. That is an absolute disaster. And of course, the stock markets usually tell us what's going to happen in the future, because all share prices are looking forward. They're not looking backwards. They don't look at how well a company has done over the past 12 months and then say, oh, great, we're going to increase the price because of what they did last year. They're looking forward in terms of saying, what's the market doing? How's this company positioned? Is it likely to make more profit going forward? Are things looking beneficial from that company's perspective? And what the stock markets are telling us from the crash that has just happened and is still going on is that the expectations over the course of the next 6 to 12 to 24 months are negative. Lots of companies have been devalued. We have seen billions wiped off the value of lots of different companies. This table shows the 8 companies that were most badly affected, and interestingly, 7 of these 8 companies are referred to as the Magnificent Seven. So these are companies that have done extremely well over the course of the last few years. As you can see, Apple was the biggest loser, with 9.3% wiped off its share price, equating to a fall in market cap of $311 billion. And of course, the reason for that is because Apple sources the majority of its products overseas, and so is going to be directly impacted by these tariffs. The second biggest loser was Nvidia, which saw 7.8% wiped off its share price, equating to $210 billion. Amazon lost 9%, equating to $187 billion. Meta also lost 9%, equating to $133 billion. Broadcom, which is the only one here that's not on the Magnificent Seven list, lost 10.4%, equating to $85 billion. Alphabet, which is the owner of Google and YouTube, saw 4% wiped off, equating to $60 billion. Microsoft shares fell by 2.4%, equating to $50 billion, and Tesla fell by 5.5%, equating to $45 billion. Now, as I mentioned at the start of today's video, China has been the first country to retaliate in terms of the tariffs that it's now going to charge on USA exports into China. It's adding 34% tariff onto all of those exports. And of course, other countries are likely to follow suit. So what we are seeing here is an escalating trade war. Tariffs are being applied on virtually everything, and what that will mean is that prices are going to go up for consumers like you and me. So we will have to pay more money when we go to the stores, therefore we'll have less disposable income at the end of each month, and that's one of the reasons why JP Morgan are calling a recession in 2025, because as people's budgets start to reduce, people will spend less, and this becomes self-fulfilling. Companies will then struggle to be able to get the same sort of revenue and profits. Their profits will go down. Some companies may even go into a loss-making situation. And all of this is coming at a bad time because lots of economies were already sitting on the verge of a recession. So the last thing that they needed was some sort of global shock like we've seen coming out of the USA. But the overall summary of today's video is that Donald Trump's Liberation Day, when he announced all of the reciprocal tariffs against every country in the world, has really backfired in terms of the immediate impact on the stock markets we have seen over $5 trillion worth of value wiped off in a single day. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the end of it. I think stock markets could continue going down over the course of the next few days and weeks. All of this tells us that the outlook for the rest of 2025 is really looking quite negative now for a lot of businesses. That tells us that there is a major risk of a global recession occurring during 2025, and obviously that is really bad news. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. Maybe not the most uplifting of videos, but I wanted to share this data with you. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me and the channel. If you bought me a coffee, thank you so much for that, really appreciate it. If you bought me a YouTube super thanks, genuinely appreciate that. And if you're a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or YouTube membership or buy me a coffee membership, in fact, thank you for that long-term support. Really does help to keep me going, keeps me motivated. And here's something to put a smile on your face.